Hello, everyone. As you file in, Kate will be right back on here in just a second. Hillary, while we're waiting for everyone to get in, if during while we're waiting, if in the chat you would just put your name, your pronouns, and what neighborhood slash city that you live in, that would be amazing.
Is my audio working? Can you hear me okay? Good, thank you.
I can hear you, Graham. And there wasn't an echo tonight, so 2 thumbs up.
I've got new headphones.
We'll wait just a few more minutes and then we'll get started. It's excited to see all of you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for being here tonight. We're very glad to have you.
Our illustrious Kate is back.
Hi, Kate.
I'm back. Are we ready to get started?
I think it's 5 after, so yeah, I think we can go ahead and do that.
Okay, fantastic. Hello, everyone. My name is Kate Rubin. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the organizing director of Be Seattle. Tonight's Building Tenant Power workshop is Sweeps, Evictions by Another Name. I'm going to start us off with the land acknowledgement. We are on the land of the Coast Salish peoples. I would like to recognize that we are occupying the traditional land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people, past and present, and honor with gratitude the land itself and the Duwamish tribe. As we do this important work on these lands, we understand that our collective liberation cannot happen without Indigenous sovereignty. We encourage each of you to sign the petition for federal recognition of the Duwamish tribe, and if you're able, visit the Longhouse and pay rent to the Duwamish. You can learn more from Real Rent Duwamish. We'll include a link for them in the resource guide that we're dropping in the chat, and we'll send it again after the presentation. Our resource guide also contains contact information for the Renting in Seattle helpline, the Seattle Department of Construction and Inspections, also known as SDCI. They're responsible for enforcing landlord-tenant laws, contact info for the Seattle Office for Civil Rights, as well as a bunch of other organizations that provide services to renters. We encourage each of you to get more involved with Be Seattle. We're seeking table volunteers, flyer friends, and people who are interested in developing their skills as part of a tenant leadership team. We host 2 renter council meetings every month. The Elder Renter Council, which centers renters ages 55 plus, and the Seattle Renter Organizing Council. These councils were created for renters to work together to strategize and fight for renter protections that they feel are important to their communities, give and receive peer-to-peer support for folks organizing in their building, grow renter power, and build community. We'll drop links to sign up for the email lists in the chat. And then before we get into the bulk of the workshop, we're just going to share some upcoming events. So mark your calendar. Tomorrow, Thursday, August 24th, from 2 to 3 p.m., the United Indians of All Tribes Foundation Homelessness Prevention Program, Native Workforce Sales Program present Tenant and Landlord Rights Workshop. Learn about maximum fees that can be charged at move-in, landlord responsibilities, types of eviction notices, and what can be done about them, as well as minimum wage, wage theft, paid sick and safe time. So we'll put the link in the chat. There's actually no need to register. Just hit that link at 2 p.m. and it'll let you right in. Saturday, August 26th from noon to 4 p.m. at the Rainier Beach Community Center. It's the 2023 Back to School Bash. Join the Rainier Beach Action Coalition for the 20th year of the Back to School Bash with free backpacks, school supplies, food, community resources, entertainment, vaccinations, and the barbershop hat. Sunday, August 27th, 7 p.m. at 3rd and Cherry Street. It's community hours with Stop the Sweeps. This is a great way to get involved with the mutual aid community. So every Sunday at 7 p.m., Stop the Sweeps hold community hours. Come for food, hot drinks, harm reduction supplies, conversation, and building relationships. Tuesday, September 5th, 6 to 7:30 p.m. at the First Baptist Church. The Complete Communities Coalition presents Candidate Forum 1 on zoning growth and the comprehensive plan. This forum will feature candidates from districts 2, 6, and 7. Those are the districts that have incumbents running for office. That covers South Seattle, downtown, Queen Anne, Magnolia, and Ballard. Light refreshments and childcare for ages 2+ will be provided. And then the following day, Wednesday, September 6th, also 6 to 7:30 p.m. at First Baptist Church. The second of the 2 candidate forums, and this forum will feature candidates from districts 1, 3, 4, and 5, covering West Seattle, Capitol Hill, the Central District, University District, Wallingford, and North Seattle. And again, they'll have light refreshments and childcare for children ages 2+. Saturday, September 9th from 11 to 3:30 p.m. at Southside Commons in Columbia City, LGBTQ Allyship presents Housing Rights Forum, focused on building renter power together with the region's diverse queer communities, and on envisioning a future that prioritizes housing justice for queer folks. It will include panels and sessions featuring organizers and policymakers, and a resource fair for organizations to table and share resources and information. B Seattle will be there. We're on one of the panels and we'll be tabling, so come say hi. And then also Saturday, September 9th from 1 to 4 p.m. Location TBD, so just save the date. It's the 2024 Solidarity Budget Demands launch event. We demand that the city of Seattle provide the residents of our city with basic guarantees for living and quality of life. The city has prioritized punishment as means to attempt to mitigate social issues when services and access to resources have been proven to mitigate and remediate circumstances that currently lead to contact with police and the punishment system. We demand the following guarantees: basic income guarantee, housing guarantee, health guarantee, transportation guarantee, communication guarantee, climate action and resilience guarantee, care guarantee, food guarantee, and living wage guarantee. There will be free food, live entertainment, and opportunities to get involved. So we'll let you know on our socials when and where, I guess we know when it's going to be Saturday, September 9th, but where this is happening. So please get involved with the Solidarity Budget. Wednesday, September 13th from 3 to 4:45 p.m. It's Solid Ground's Rent Smart webinar, Threats of Evictions and Your Rights as a Tenant. Are you concerned that your landlord may try to kick you out? Learn local legal resources, how local city laws may impact you, the statewide good cause eviction bill and how it impacts month-to-month tenancies, and how to get an eviction off your tenant screening report. Thursday, September 14th, 5:30 p.m. at the Winco Northwest Forum. Town Hall Seattle and the Seattle Office for Civil Rights present Reverend Ben McBride with Marcus Harrison Green, Radical Belonging. What if the revolution isn't about what we need to do, but who we need to become to create a world where everyone truly belongs? Activist and speaker Reverend Ben McBride knows what it's like to wade into conflict in order to stir up the truth. From the kill zone in Oakland, where he moved with his young family, to the uprising in Ferguson, to the moral impoverishment of the white evangelical church, he's confronted the injustices that threaten to drown us all. McBride shares his insight on navigating murky, confusing, and even dangerous times in his new book, Troubling the Water. In the truth-telling tradition of Brian Stevenson and Bishop William Barber, he offers a steady, guiding voice along the path to genuine healing. As inequalities weaken our lives, well-meaning people may ask, what do I need to do in order to create a world where all can belong? But McBride asserts that instead we need to ask, who do I need to become? Seattle journalist Marcus Harrison Green joins Reverend McBride on stage to discuss how we can navigate the challenging waters of our society together and create a more just and inclusive world. Tickets are sliding scale fee $5 to $25 and free for those ages 22 and younger. Thursday, September 14th, 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. at El Centro de la Raza in room 311. That's the Roberto Maestros Digital Literacy Lab. And then also online via Zoom. It's the next meeting of the Seattle Renter Organizing Council. Dinner will be provided for in-person attendees, so please join us. Tuesday, September 19th, 5:30 to 8 p.m. at U Heights. It's a 2023 Human Services Candidates Forum. This forum, hosted by the Seattle Human Services Coalition and moderated by Marcus Green, will allow time for each Seattle City and King County Council candidate to answer the questions provided by coalition members. They also aim to allow time for questions from the audience. This is an opportunity for hundreds of human service providers and the people in the communities they influence to hear candidates respond to questions that may not be posed by other groups, but matter to them as voters. How will the candidates ensure that our communities are just and thriving? Wednesday, September 20th, location TBD. We usually meet at the Capitol Hill Library, but it's booked again. It's the Elder Renter Council meeting. Snacks and beverages will be provided for in-person attendees. If you RSVP, we will update the RSVP with the location. Tuesday, September 26th, 5:30 to 7 p.m. It's the RAP King County Regional Call. The aim of the Resident Action Project is to build a statewide network of people who are directly impacted by housing and homelessness issues who are leading the charge for social change. Gain organizing, advocacy, and policy skills by attending RAP's monthly regional Zoom meetings on the fourth Tuesday of every month. And I also am a RAP member, so I'll see you there. Wednesday, September 27th, 5 to 6:30 p.m. It's Solid Ground's Rent Smart webinar, Mold and Your Rights as a Tenant. Mold is a serious problem in the Pacific Northwest. In this webinar, you'll find out why, plus how to treat and prevent it. You'll learn how to recognize when a house has a mold problem, owner responsibilities to solve repair problems, what you should do as a tenant, and what you can do if your landlord doesn't fix the problem. Also Wednesday, September 27th, 6 to 8 p.m. is Seattle's September Building Tenant Power Workshop, which will focus on Seattle's comprehensive plan. We'll talk about what you need to know, why it's important to renters, and what the next steps are for community. And finally, this was a lot of events. Thursday, September 28th to Saturday, September 30th at Hilton Garden Inn in Olympia. It's the Washington Tenant Power Assembly. The Tenants Union of Washington State is hosting a gathering of tenants across the state of Washington to build skills around developing tenants associations and fighting for housing justice. Their goal is to educate and mobilize tenants to create a more equitable and just society where everyone has access to safe, healthy, and affordable housing. The purpose of base building and passing a legislative initiative about rent stabilization is to address the growing issue of housing insecurity and lack of affordability, particularly for low-income and marginalized communities. Whew, okay, that was so many events now that I had to read them out loud. So I would like to introduce our amazing moderator and all of our panelists as part of our roundtable today. This panel is hosted by our very own Dee Powers. Dee is a street level advocate and activist, heavily invested in helping educate the public on the experiences of living life outdoors. They've experienced 7 years of lived experience as a vehicle resident in the Seattle area. Dee was the recipient of Real Change's Change Agent of the Year Award in 2021. They are the new chairperson for the Vehicle Residency Work Group hosted by the King County Regional Homelessness Authority. And they're on the Mission Programs Committee at Uplift Northwest. Prior to accepting their current position on the B Seattle staff, they actually served as our board president for nearly 2 years. Okay. Sorry, I'm getting into the speakers. Dr. Graham Pruss is the director of the National Vehicle Residency Collective. Dr. Pruss is an anthropologist who has conducted research with vehicle residents in urban, suburban, and rural areas across the USA for the past decade. Graham has experienced homelessness as a teen in the California Bay Area, and he helped develop Seattle's first safe parking program in 2012. He was Seattle's primary outreach specialist for vehicle residents from 2013 to 2015. He is currently the director of the National Vehicle Residency Collective, board member of the Colorado Safe Parking Initiative, and the vehicle residency consultant for the King County Regional Homelessness Authority. Jay Jones is an advocate for Stop the Sweeps. Jay uses they and he pronouns. They are fighting against the city's brutal policy of endless sweeps as the primary response to homelessness in our city. Outside of their work fighting against sweeps, Jay is also a steering committee member of House Our Neighbors, the organization that helped to create a social housing developer in Seattle, as well as an active member of Seattle's mutual aid community. I'm sorry, y'all, my screen keeps jumping around, so I'm having a little trouble reading, but I am almost done. Our next speaker, Katie Gentry, is a service provider and outreach worker. Katie uses she, her pronouns. She's a Seattle renter and street outreach worker who's involved in mutual aid. She believes in the transformative power of getting to know your neighbors and building community. Fadi Hassaf, an attorney for the Northwest Justice Project. Fadi graduated from Vanderbilt University in 2013 and later attended Case Western Reserve University School of Law, receiving his law degree with honors in the health law concentration in 2017. After law school, he worked to advance policy solutions to support affordable housing and equitable development. In 2020, he joined Northwest Justice Project as a staff attorney focused on consumer and housing law. And Fadi, I realize I may not have pronounced your name correctly. Would you mind saying your name aloud real quick so everyone has it right?
Sure, it's Fadi.
Fadi, thank you. Sorry
Thanks.
about that. I should have clarified that before we got started.
Okay.
And then last, but definitely not least, allow me to introduce Melissa and Joe, our voices of lived experience for tonight's discussion. No conversation about a marginalized group of people should ever be done without the all-important observations and experiences of those who have actually lived it. So we are honored to have you two join us here tonight. Both Melissa and Joe have previously experienced homelessness in Seattle and are now renting in Bellevue. The slide, we didn't have a picture of them, so that was a quick Google search of two people that I didn't know what they would look like. So we are so grateful for all of you who've joined us to come to speak from a place of knowledge, and plus have the conviction to speak out about sweeps and their consequences for our neighbors who are affected by them. And so with that, I have done so much talking. Please let me hand the mic off to my colleague, Dee. Thank you for joining us.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight for this very important conversation. My name is Dee Powers. My pronouns are they, them. Many of you already know me, but for the sake of this introduction, allow me to tell you a little of my story. I was housed less than a year and a half ago after 7 years living in an old motorhome only 2 miles from my last apartment, which I was priced out of unexpectedly in early 2015. Over the years, I heard a similar refrain from those of us living outside, in addition to activists, advocates, and researchers across the area. Why does the city keep telling us to move along when they won't give us somewhere safer to go? Why do officials focus on removing all traces of our friends and family living on the streets when they aren't willing to scale up the services needed for people to survive? Where do we go now? I'm one of the fortunate few that have successfully exited homelessness, but I left friends and chosen family behind to an increasing rate of displacement, enforcement, impound, and trauma caused by this city's choice of homelessness policy. What worked for me? A stable place to park, free from the harassment of police and parking enforcement, where I wasn't swept away or forced to move. It enabled outreach providers to find me and remain in contact with me as housing was lined up. I went straight from my RV to an apartment. But other than the offer of a placement at a sanctioned tent encampment in exchange for the keys and title to my vehicle, that apartment that I'm sitting in now is the only time I received an opportunity to move back indoors from the streets of Seattle. Tonight, I am pleased to welcome a group of experts from across an entire spectrum of experiences, all here to speak on the topic of displacement in the form of encampment sweeps, a troubling cycle which has been the focus of local news, street-level activists, and multiple legal actions for well over a decade. In this city, where rents are rapidly spiraling out of control and wages do not keep up with the increase in cost, we are seeing a sharp increase in the number of our neighbors losing their homes and making do with what shelter they can create in Seattle at street level. Some, like me, manage to move into a vehicle. Others find community with chosen family and friends in groups of tents and home-built shelters as best they can. But one thing we do know for certain is that the need for permanently deeply affordable housing far outstrips the supply, and shelter capacity in Seattle continues to be inadequate to bring all of our friends back indoors. So for this special solidarity edition of Be Seattle's Building Tenant Power Workshop series, we will be discussing a variety of topics pertaining to the forcible displacement of our neighbors who have literally nowhere else to go. We sincerely hope you come away from this workshop equipped with the information needed to help advocate for everyone struggling with housing insecurity and a more complete view of the inhumane and heavy-handed tactics involved in the repeated eviction of our unhoused neighbors. So with that, we'll jump right into the roundtable discussion. I am going to hold space for questions from you too, so don't hesitate to type your questions into the chat during the discussion, or you can wait until we open it up for Q&A and you can ask our experts yourself. I believe all of you wonderful panelists did get a pre-copy of our questions for this evening. I doubt we're going to get to all of them, but we are going to start with the basics. Who would like to go first and tell us what is a sweep? Melissa and Joe probably are the ones with the most knowledge. No? Yes? They're still muted. I see Katie raising a hand. Katie, talk about a sweep. What is it?
Hello, everyone. My name is Katie. I do street outreach for my job. I'm also involved in mutual aid sweeps. I really like the ACLU's definition of sweeps. I'm just going to read it. A sweep, sometimes referred to by government agencies as a cleanup, is the forced disbanding of encampments on public property and the removal of both unhoused individuals and their property from that area. So then aside from that definition, this is kind of my aside. I think here in Seattle, city officials get really triggered by the word sweep, and they prefer to refer to them as removals. And I believe that this is likely because city officials don't want to sit with their own discomfort with the fact that they're actively perpetuating and pushing for disbanding of communities and causing great harm and even death to unsheltered people by doing so. Sweeps happen because housed people and business owners and politicians decide they don't want unhoused people in a certain area. And so these powers will justify the sweeps based on an arbitrary set of criteria that continues to falsely paint the unhoused as like dirty or dangerous, which is utterly ridiculous. Like if somebody was to OD in their apartment, would you evict everyone in the apartment? You know, if someone down the street from you, there's a shooting outside their house or in their house, does that mean the whole neighborhood has to leave their homes? Of course not. So it's not a good practice. And, you know, also I ultimately think the city doesn't want unhoused people to reside anywhere long enough to organize together to push back. So keeping people on their toes all the time and having to start over all the time makes it really hard to get ahead in a lot of ways. And ultimately, yeah, sweeps do not at all consider like any goals, timeline, or autonomy of unsheltered people and what they might each want or need help with. So that's awesome.
Thank you, Katie, so much. I see your hand, Graham. I would love to hear what you have to say.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much for allowing me to be part of this panel. This is such a great conversation, and the host is such a wonderful host. This is just great. So thank you so much. Katie's definition was excellent. That's perfect. I just wanted to add something to that, which is that in Seattle, often sweeps are covered under what's called the MDARS, which is the Multi-Departmental Administrative Rules. And this is if you've ever heard that the sweeps are supposed to have outreach associated with them and offers for housing, that's covered under the MDARS. Now, for those of you who've seen sweeps occur, you'd probably say that those do not always actually happen, and I think that you would be right in that. At least that's what our observations have seen. One of the things that's important to recognize is that when it comes to RV sweeps for people living in vehicles, they're actually generally not referred to as sweeps in Seattle. They're called remediations. And because of that, they often do not have the same MDAR requirements, and they don't have the same level of notification, the same level of services that are required when they're done. And this is one of the ways that cities like Seattle and many others are able to sort of separate groups of people within the unhoused communities from their civil rights and their civil protections, such as things like the MDARS. So this is sort of the way that the machine unfortunately works.
That's very true, Graham. Thank you. Joe and Melissa, I see your hand raised. You go ahead and unmute.
Is that us now?
Gotcha.
So that's your guys' definition of sweeps. Let me tell you about our definition of it. You wake up in the morning, you hear all these trucks outside, and people yelling and screaming about "Get your stuff! Don't take my stuff! Come outside your tent!" People throwing stuff in garbage cans. They got big old dumps out there, and they're pulling stuff away. You're in your place, not knowing what to do, not knowing where you're going to go. So you get up, you get dressed. If you're not already dressed, you look at your wife or husband or whatever, and go, "What do we do?" You sit there for about 10, 20 minutes, crying, trying to figure out what the hell you're going to do. You have no idea. This is the very beginning of them. This is the beginning, like 5 years ago. We were in front of 2020. We were in front of the library, and the very first sweep, man, we ever went through, and it was horrible, man. I mean, in a modern city, they come through and tear your freaking house down. I mean, it just makes no sense to me, man. How they did it back then it's gotten a tiny bit better. They don't just come in and put a rope to your tent and pull it out the street anymore. That's what I used to do. I started out doing that crap. 15 minutes to get out. Everything you had, 15 minutes, or you got dumped out. Period. And if you didn't do that right, man, the cops are there, they give you a hassle about it. So definitions of sweeps and definitions of stuff that you guys are asking are going to be different than what you guys, have went through as far as your information. So, I'm not very good at talking, but I'm just going to say how it is. I'm not going to bash anybody, but I'm going to be real about it. So, thank you for letting me talk. I appreciate it.
No, that was perfect.
That is why we have you here tonight. You bring important and vital context to what we know to the process versus what is actually being done during the process. So thank you. Always speak the truth in situations like these. I mean, and always, it's vital. But that segues right into my next question. aren't the authorities giving people adequate time to prepare for a sweep? I mean, we hear that 72 hours notice is usually given. At least that's what the news says. Jay, I assume you want to talk about obstruction sweeps, so I'm going to let you chit chat.
Yeah, hey, yeah, I'm Jay. I use they pronouns, so stuff with sweeps. Thanks for having me here. Very excited to frame this discussion this way. Yeah, no, there's obstruction sweeps. So basically, the long and short is like 72 hours almost never happens anymore. You know, that's what the IMDARs say. But that there's multiple ways in which that doesn't happen. There's obstruction sweeps where they just say, hey, this is actually deemed an obstruction. We don't have to follow our own rules. And so you got 30 minutes to get out, exactly what was just said. Additionally, though, like even when notice is given, I would say most of the time we're stop and sweeps. We're always looking for notices. We're always trying to show up and support folks who are being swept. And I would say we average like 24 hours notice, like maybe 48 hours notice. But a sweep that happened at an encampment that I've been going to for about a year or so with my mutual aid group just happened a few weeks ago. And a lady who was there when it was swept, she was very frustrated, of course. She yells at the cops, hey, aren't we supposed to get 72 hours notice? Like, what's going on here? Like, I know the rules. I know how this is supposed to go. And the cop just looked at her and said, we don't do that anymore. We're not doing that anymore. 72 hours is like a thing of the past, you know? Which, you know, I mean, I'm sure if you ask a supervisor, he'd be like, oh, no. But that's what he said. And that's what we see a lot of times, where it's just like, oh, yeah, isn't that rule nice? But we can deem anything an obstruction. In 2022, I think it was like 80% of the sweeps were like obstruction sweeps, which means they don't have to follow their rules. In June, it was like 43% of the sweeps were obstruction sweeps and they don't have to follow their rules. So they can get around their rules any way they want to, you know, because they make them. So that's been our experience, that they don't give the warning that people need. And then all the services that they're supposed to offer, you know, it's hit or miss at best. And it's never enough to meet the needs of the camps that they're clearing out.
Thank you so much, Jay. How does the sweep process affect the people being displaced? Joe, Melissa, you are probably the ones with the most recent experience. Would you like to tell a story of a particularly, of any of your experiences being swept? If not, it's okay.
Sure.
Hold on, I just wanted to hear what was the first part of that question, Dee?
Yeah, how does the sweep process affect the people being displaced?
Okay, so I just want to make sure we got it all. So like what happens after this?
That's all.
During the sweep?
Yeah,
Well,
how do you feel? What does it do to you?
I feel horrible. I mean, every 3 days, we had to move somewhere. And I remember having slept and all of our stuff, we had to pack up and just move across the street for a bit, you know, until the police were gone. And then we came back to the same part and had to put it back up again. And that was like every 3 days. And by like the fourth or fifth friggin' time, I knew what to do, you know, and that's pretty sad, but I knew this had to go, you know, but then it was so hard and difficult to do that, you know, and yeah.
No, I totally understand. It is a horrible thing to have to experience. The typical renter in Seattle gets at least a month, if not more, to get the heck out if they are told to move. But those people who already don't have a place are given so much less time to pack their stuff than the average renter. And it's an eviction from home, just like any other. Are there always services, shelter, and support offered when an encampment is displaced? I see Katie shaking her head. I see Graham shaking his head. I see Fadi shaking his head a little too there. Did you want to talk about it, Katie or Graham? Katie, go for it.
Yeah, and kind of going off what you last said about how does the sweep process affect people being displaced? They're dehumanizing and demoralizing, and they really do communicate that that person's tent or dwelling is not their home, but like some type of eyesore or inconvenience to the public. And so sweeps are communicating to unhoused people that they are less than and that they don't belong here. And so they're prioritizing the wants of housed people over the very real survival needs of unhoused people, which is totally messed up. But to answer your question about shelter and services and supports being offered, it just doesn't happen. And there are, reasons for that. And the simple reason is that we don't have enough shelter beds for everyone who's unsheltered. And the tangent reason to that is that shelters aren't supposed to be housing, right? Shelters are not housing. They are for emergencies. They're for like if there's like an earthquake or like a fire, people go to a shelter temporarily. They're made to be temporary, not to be lived in. And they're often congregate instead of non-congregate, which of course we all value privacy and locking up our belongings. And so it's actually pretty rare for adequate services like shelter referrals to be made at sweeps. The way that city set aside shelters work. So there's all the shelters in the city, and then out of that there's shelters that are called the city set asides, and those are the ones that are managed by the Human Service Department, which is the HOPE team, which is 5 people in the entire city. So 5 people in the entire city control whether or not people get into shelter at all these different shelters. So I make recommendations for shelter. I don't make actual referrals because I don't have control over whether or not someone gets in. And so more often than not, these city set aside shelters are full, especially the desirable ones like tiny homes. And the reason they're desirable is because they are private and you can lock your door. And so because resources are tied, these city set-asides are tied to sweeps. They're always offered first to any sweeps going on around the city, but then they go very quickly. And that actually creates a worse problem because then outside of sweeps, it's hard to get someone inside. So it doesn't look at vulnerability. And it doesn't also look at anything, at any matches, at any appropriate matches. So there could be an encampment of 10 white men that are each living in their own tent, but they may only have spots at Benu or Janet Peters Place. And Benu is for African-American men or Latinx men only. And then Janet Peters Place is for femme identifying people only. And so then none of those 10 men will be offered those spots, but the city can then go ahead and say they offered shelter because they're just checking the box. So we have to look at what the shelter who the shelter allows to be there and what capacity the shelter has. And often the way that the capacity is figured out is reliant on the shelter staff, and the shelter staff aren't paid enough to work there consistently, and there is not a good mechanism for assessing how many beds are actually available on any given day. And then there are some side projects of the city, like Woodland Park was kind of a side project of the city where they hoarded a bunch of resources for a specific sweep in a specific area. So those beds that are sitting empty for months leading up to a large sweep are going unused. I would like to personally see the city completely sever shelter beds from being tied to sweeps, because that would then stop the narrative of we're offering shelter at sweeps. I actually think that it would be better to look at vulnerability and look at placing shelters in each neighborhood so people can go somewhere local and stay within their support network and within the resources they're already accessing. Because yeah, if someone is, you know, an elderly, disabled person of color that really wants to get inside, like I won't be able to get them in unless there's an open spot, and that open spot will be offered to people being swept, even if they are more able-bodied and less vulnerable than this person.
Thank you so much, Katie. Fadi, do you have anything you wanted to add?
I could add a few things. Sorry, I just unmuted myself.
Thank you so much for being here.
No, thank you for having me. I'm really excited about talking about this and talking with some of my colleagues. I know Graham and Jay know exactly how I feel about sweeps. One of the main things that come to mind when I think about sweeps is just this unpredictability, which I think is mirrored in some of the comments where these rules are constantly changing. But an important thing to remember is that there still are constitutional rights that apply here, because someone is taking your property without a warrant. And so that needs to be there needs to be critical analysis as to each situation. Each situation has a different conclusion, whether someone's constitutional and civil rights were violated based on, say, if notice was provided. And I know there was a recent court decision, probably get into it later. But another quick thing I wanted to say, and I think Dee, you said it in terms of evictions, that process might take 3 or 4 weeks. And it's important to note that that's a statutory process that's meant to be an expedited process. So it takes several weeks, but it's meant to be an expedited process. Again, we're dealing with people's property here and the government coming into a situation and taking your property. And the third point I wanted to make really briefly is that in my experiences and the experiences of my clients, resources are seldom offered. And I've actually seen situations in court where the offering of resources is completely fabricated. But that's not uncommon, where they say resources were offered, but really it's because of what we were talking about in terms of how to do this properly, if you have to do it at all, the notice that needs to be provided. In some of the court cases that have come out in the past couple of years, roughly outlining that process. And I say roughly because there are still some pending cases that will hopefully patch up some of that work. But even then, you know, in the real world, anything can happen and those rules kind of get pushed aside more often than not.
Thank you very much. No, that's very important insight. Very grateful to have you here as a legal expert today. Graham, you wanted to say something about RVs and sweep, well, remediations.
Remediations,
So he likes to call them
right.
remediations.
That's right. And actually, it's to that point, actually, you know, and I just wanted to say real quick, I appreciate this whole conversation and what we're talking about. And I want to say people are not garbage to be swept away. People are being forcibly removed from public space by law enforcement. We shouldn't be using euphemisms here, but I know that this is a common terminology. I'm not going to get in anyone's case for using the term sweep, but I just want to remind us of that. People are not garbage. We're not throwing trash away. These are human beings that are being removed of their property. And that gets to you know, what I think is an important piece. There's 2 things I want to say. First is that when it comes to the remediations, particularly one of the reasons why I'm not going to conjecture into why they may be called remediations. I wasn't there for those conversations and why they were termed that way. But when it comes to people living in vehicles, there are not these spaces that there is a woefully inadequate amount of emergency shelter space, as Katie pointed out. But the amount of safe parking spaces is mind-bendingly low. There are for those who don't know, within Seattle, the percentage of people who are estimated to be living in vehicles in King County is anywhere from 30 to 50%. By some numbers in Seattle, that number could be as high as 2,500 people. And the number of parking programs for people living in vehicles is less than 15 parking spaces. Okay, so when we're talking about available emergency shelter beds, really we need to be talking about parking spaces for people who own their RV or their trailer. And with those spaces, and I should mention, of those parking spaces, none of them are currently for RVs. Okay, so there is a program that is opening up soon that will be the first in Seattle to have RVs, But again, that's just the first of those programs. And so this is one of the reasons why I work with King County Regional Homelessness Authority, that we're trying to expand that, not just in Seattle, but across King County, the access to safe, legal parking spaces for people. But I think that it gets to a deeper issue, which is the second thing I wanted to bring up, which is that the dispossession of settler colonialism cannot be forgotten here. That what we are seeing is part of a larger pattern that is woven into settler colonialism, particularly Anglo-settler colonialism, and it is this idea that of socially constructing or creating a narrative about a possession as being not valuable because it's not cultivated, because it's not productive, because it's not seen as having some sort of monetary value, and that because of that, it is then seen as being more valuable when it's transferred ownership to someone who will cultivate it. And this is really the core. This is how settler colonialism functioned, and this is how lands were stripped away from native peoples. And this is very much also how in this today we say junker vehicles are being shown as not being valuable, and they're being stripped away of their people's property. People are having their tents and their possessions taken away from them. People who are living in RVs, or even in a lot of parking programs, as I mentioned, not just in Seattle, but all across the country. Many parking programs require someone to even sign a statement saying that they're going to move out of their vehicle, as you mentioned, Dee, just to be able to park in that program. And this is another example of that. Rather than we need to be thinking about how the philosophy of that dispossession really is affecting sweeps and affecting our ability to understand these possessions, as you pointed out, Fadi. These are property as valuable. Right, that these are that, and then we need to be able to stand up and say this has value for this person, whether it's medical documentation, medications, personal records. I mean, for family records. These possessions that are lost in mass displacements, forcible removals, are devastating.
Thank you so much, Graham. It's you're right. I mean, it's horrible. I've seen people crying on the wrong side of police tape because the only photo of their children is still in their tent, and it's gone. It's garbage at that point to the city, and that's a heartbreaker. And it shouldn't be that way. Jay, I see your hand.
Yeah, I just really wanted to add on quickly to that point, just kind of the mindset, because I think you're spot on there, Graham, and others who have spoken to this. Like, I've heard this sweep crew so many times, like, kind of get into it with a person over whether or not their own stuff was like valuable, like, and the mindset of these people who look at like this tent, and like the tent's been outside, if you've been living in it for like a few months, there's gonna be some holes in it, right? It's just how it goes. And they're just like, look at this garbage, and this person is over here like, that's everything I own, this is my life, these are like my most prized possessions. And so that just like the disconnect between the people who are enacting the violence and how like, and the way that they're kind of able to frame the world around them as they go about enacting this violence truly is like, you hear it in like the people who write on the ground, you hear it in the politicians. It really is that mindset that justifies this whole thing. They can completely devalue a person and all of their belongings, and then that is kind of how they kind of feel okay with doing what they're doing when they know it's like so fucked. Sorry, messed up.
Thank you so much, Jay. That Barbara in the chat says that sweep crews in their area have been caught stealing items just for resale. Sorry, folks. But I'm going to leave this one open for whoever wants to answer it. In your experience, what kind of services, shelter, and support would actually be a meaningful offer of help to a person living outdoors? What is most commonly requested? What is most commonly needed? Oh, well, Joe, I saw a hand. Is that you?
We'll go first. Here we go.
I'm still getting used to this. I'm not used to this.
Thank you. I'm all over the place.
You know, can you say the question? Can you say it again?
Yeah. In your experience, what kind of services, shelter, and support would be a meaningful offer of help? Like most commonly, like what would be like the ideal? What would be best?
Is that fictional or real?
Go for it.
Which side? I mean, honestly,
I mean,
other
other than sweeps. I mean, if you want to go with like
in reality, we haven't figured it out yet. Honestly, in reality, we haven't figured it out. If we did, we would figure out how to do it now. I can't tell you because no one knows what exactly is going to work. I guess it'd be a combination of everything we're trying now, plus luck and God, whatever it is, so we figure it out. Because personally, I don't know. I don't know. Enhance what we have, make work what we got right now until we can figure out how to make it better. Because right now it's not getting it done. So we got to take what we get from what we have until we figure it out, man. That's just what I think.
Yeah. I see you, Jay. Go for it.
No, I think Joe just said it, everything we've got and just kind of make it work. But I think the kind of important piece of that is it just depends on who you're talking to, because what's going to work for one person just isn't going to work for another person. For some people, it's going to be oh, they're really just looking for that tiny house and they're going to be cool with it. For somebody, it's going to be yeah, honestly, I would take an enhanced shelter, as long as it fits these certain criteria, or I really just need a space in my neighborhood because I want to stay with my people, or I really need an apartment by myself. I am so traumatized from being out here. I need to be able to lock myself in a space and feel very safe, so I think that goes back to points other people have made of the ideal is going to be what works best for the individual you're working with. And you're just never going to be able to make that happen at a sweep because the people who are there showing up offering services are meeting you that morning, or maybe they went out the day before and met you, right? So you just you're never going to be able to make the ideal or even the acceptable happen for somebody, except for on super rare occasions when you go about it like that. So yeah, I think the everything we've got and make it better is really that's the magic right there.
Katie?
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said so far. And I think the city is really dropping the ball because we could be doing the city could be doing so many things right now that would greatly improve the lives of people living unsheltered. Just basic things like basic trash collection on a regular basis, access to public bathrooms, access to clean water, getting more mobile med funded, getting there to be low barrier places for people to go pick up their medications daily that aren't a drugstore. And so I think that having those things put in place first and meeting people where they're at until obviously the answer is housing, right? And people want to go inside. But what housing looks like for each person is different. And people have different needs. And so in the meantime, until we get a bunch of different types of affordable housing in place, whether that is catering to different accessibility needs, different needs for people's mental health, different cohabitation needs for communities that want to stay together. Until we have that, the city could be doing the things that it already does for housed people and extend that to our unhoused neighbors.
It's brilliant. Did I see a hand? I thought I saw someone wave. Is that you, Jay? No, you were snapping. Okay.
I was snapping my fingers.
All right, fair enough. Graham, was that a hand?
Honestly, let's move on. You guys have all covered it all. Again, there's not much more I could say. This was
my next section's about vehicle resident enforcement anyway. So I would love for one of our professional experts, such as Graham or Fadi, to talk about vehicular homelessness and where the dividing line is between housed in an RV and unhoused in an RV. Go for it, Graham.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I will say what I was going to say because it directly relates to your question here, and it's that Dee, we've known each other for quite some time, and to those who don't know, I as Dee mentioned in my introduction was mentioned, I think Kate mentioned it. I was an outreach worker in Seattle for several years. At the time, the only outreach worker in vehicle residents, and the displacement, the instability that it caused, the displacement trauma that was caused by the mass eviction from public space were devastating to people, and they were devastating for outreach. And it made it extremely difficult. As Barbarella, I think, said that nobody's going to trust somebody coming around who's got a police escort. You know, when I was an outreach worker, I was often directed to go talk to people by the police because, like, there's this direct, sort of intervention there, and that really hurts rapport. It hurts trust, and that's something I think that we should be working against, and really having it is a really a human-centered approach, meeting people where they're at, as Katie mentioned, and that's the key. Now, I'm sorry. Now, what was the question though about vehicle residency? I'm sorry. I want to make sure I answered the exact question.
The question was, where's the dividing line between unhoused in an RV and housed in an RV?
And so for many vehicle residents, having a place to park your home can be that stability. And that for many, what they are actually looking for, Dee, right, is a place to be able to park their home and maintain the connection with social workers, case managers, housing case managers, or maybe they're just looking for an affordable place to park their home, like a mobile home park. Mobile home parks have been a pool of affordable housing in this country for generations, and they're disappearing rapidly. And this is one of the reasons why we're seeing more people living in vehicles. There's less spaces to park that vehicle, so there's more people living in public spaces. So for many people who are living in vehicles, as we know, there's a tremendous social stigma around homelessness and around the term homelessness. Many people who are living in vehicles do not self-identify as homeless. Often for very good reasons, they recognize that their vehicle is an important asset and that it is a home, particularly larger vehicles like an RV or a detached trailer. I mean, arguably these were created for habitation, at least short-term habitation, but people see that very much identify this as a home. And it's so first off, many vehicle residents do not identify as homeless and often are not necessarily engaged with homeless systems. Not necessarily just because of that self-identity, but also because, as I mentioned, there's not a lot of parking spaces in those homeless service systems. As we know, a lot of the homeless service systems are located in downtown cores where there's just not parking for your RV around. If you wanted to go to the Downtown Emergency Services Center, there's really no chance that you're going to be able to park your detached trailer around there while you go in to get help. And so at the same time, because many cities have laws, like in Seattle, where oversized vehicles, such as an RV or a school bus, are required to park in industrial zones. These areas are far from the city core. They're far from where the water is. They're located in food and water deserts. They're located, as you mentioned, Katie, where there is not garbage, there's not waste receptacles, there's not fresh water to tie into. And often there's not shade, and often there's not a lot of. Though we talk, we talk carefully about the police in this conversation. There's also not a lot of police protection for vulnerable people in those areas. The police is often not actually protecting vulnerable people in those areas, and so this is where people living in vehicles become, because of the fact that they have to stay in those areas and often are afraid of leaving their vehicle because of the consequences of leaving it unattended in public space because of ticketing or the impounds, or maybe someone breaking into their vehicle and stealing their stuff or flashing their tires, whatever may happen. So these things definitely happen. That because of that, often people are unable to exit the vehicle to get medical care, to get social services, to get housing care. And so again, this is where there's this, for many vehicle residents, there is this significant barrier between homeless services and their home of the vehicle. In fact, often it's fair to say that many vehicle residents live in a liminal space between home and homelessness.
Thank you so much, Graham. Fadi, did you? Yeah, I had a feeling you wanted to say something. Go for it.
I think it's just wanted to point out the irony of offering housing services to individuals that live in RV that already consider themselves housed which Graham pointed out, and the need to provide access to land in order to achieve, maintain, and grow, to have that stability that's necessary. The other thing, and I think we might talk about this in the next part of this question, is that I think it's a bit of a disservice to only focus on sweeps and police conduct in these situations, because we also see a lot of loss of property, impounds of vehicles in the private context, and we don't want to leave those individuals behind, because at the end of the day, it's the same outcome. You lose your property, and in the discussion, in the policy discussions that we're having, the focus sometimes is in the public impound context, where they're targeting and criminalizing one's status because they're living in their vehicle and they happen to be low income, and there might be protections under the Constitution that apply in the public context, but those same protections don't necessarily apply in a private context. And we see just as many people that live in their RVs getting targeted by by the police and the municipality and state actors, as we see private entities impounding vehicles because they might or might not be on their property, or calling the cops and working with the cops to target an individual that they believe has outstayed their welcome, or is somewhat preventing them from achieving their business goals or their financial goals, or whatever the case may be. So I just wanted to point that out. And I think Katie has a comment.
Oh yeah, I 100% agree with that. I 100% agree with that. I also want to throw in that over in Ballard, where I do outreach, many of the folks that I work with have shared with me increased violence by vigilantes and housed people, like driving by and throwing cans of tomato sauce at their RV. Another place that I was at recently, these workers at a cement making facility, they also have access to gravel, and all that, and they drive these big trucks, and they came by and like spun their wheels down into the gravel and shot the gravel out at these two vehicles, breaking windows and scaring the pets that were living inside, and could have really seriously injured some of the residents or the pets there. And it was just incredibly scary and intimidating. And there's lots of threats of violence. And then, even by extension, like by me helping people who are having threats, I am also being threatened as well by these neighbors. And it's like, and I have a home that I can go back to, then lock my door at night. And then the folks that I'm serving don't have a place where they don't have the privacy that they need, and don't have the security they need. And they're not being protected by anyone other than themselves and people like us who care. But yeah, I just want to note that like the rhetoric spun by the city and the misinformation and bad folks out there like Jonathan Cho, for example, spinning these narratives that unhoused people are dangerous or dirty or unworthy, that's making people's safety even more at risk, and it's causing housed people to like take action in a bad way. Graham.
I just wanted to, I'm not sure if we're going to get to this point, but, and this is building on both what Fadi said and what Katie said. There's also the installation of barricades that have been done by private actors throughout the city that are often done immediately following these sweeps. And in particular, they are used to target people living in vehicles as a way to remove them permanently, or at least semi-permanently, from public space. What this is literally a banishment of poor people from the city by private actors, I should say. Generally, they're actually installed by private businesses in ways that are blatantly illegal.
Absolutely. In fact, in my questions that I sent y'all, I was pretty sure we would have a conversation about the legality of hostile architecture put into public space. Did anyone want to talk about that in particular tonight regarding hostile architecture, eco blocks, the legality of such, the proliferation of such? I'm going to leave it a little open-ended on that because I know there's many examples. Thank you.
I can speak a little bit to that. If so hostile architecture, for those who aren't familiar with the term, is something that has been more studied over the past decade more and more, and it's something that is it's basically any object, or it could even be like a sign, a no parking sign, that is installed in a public space that restricts some access to services. Often, another example that might be a park bench that has like a blockage in it so that person can't lay on it. They're just forms of architecture that are done to basically restrict some person from access to that general public civic service. And so what we're seeing in Seattle, not just Seattle, it's in cities all up and down the West Coast. In the National Vehicle Residency Collective, we have many times have members who report similar things that we're seeing in Seattle. Is particularly during COVID and in the years, well, I guess we're still in COVID, but during this COVID pandemic, we have seen a marked rise in the use of these what are called eco blocks sometimes. They're also basically they're retaining walls for those who don't know, but they're large kind of Lego looking concrete blocks, barricades. If you've driven around the city, I'm sure you've seen them. And if you're not in Seattle, I'm sure you've seen them because they're really all over the place. And they're called generally eco blocks, I think because they use the last little bit of concrete, I think is the idea. They're supposed to be like ecological. I'm not sure I want to give them such a friendly name because they're they're used as a way to they are used by private businesses as a way to extend their control into public space and as a way to remove people that they see as offensive from public space. And again, it's this dispossession, right? It is a way of saying that that public space is more useful if it is actually removed of parking, right? If there is a concrete barricade in that public space so nobody can park in it, rather than it being used as a place for a person to live, right? And so this is, I think this is why it's important to understand how that dispossession operates. And even if we can, I'd like to figure out how we can talk about reversing the flow of that dispossession, how we can start pushing it the other way and start repossessing and finding ways for people to actually be able to maintain that space. Fadi,
So one of the things about eco blocks, and Graham and I have talked about this before, is that sometimes the presence, or when you first see an eco block put in a certain area where there was a car, it's usually happens right after a sweep or happens right after RV remediation or a vehicle sweep. So the idea is that there's probably multiple people that understand or know or told that, hey, there's a sweep happening, and then the local business comes and puts an eco block. The other thing that I find interesting about it is that, say if you were trying to reserve a parking spot, or if you're a restaurant that wants to expand to an outdoor cafe, there's usually a process before you can get that approval to take over that space. But in this case, this is completely unregulated. They're just private actors taking up public space for the sole purpose of removing individuals and preventing them from having the opportunity to live there. The other thing, in terms of developing some of the issues with this sort of hostile architecture, is finding parallels, I believe, between some of the hostile architecture that we're seeing here and some of the litigation that's happening in New York City with scaffolding. There's some interesting parallels between the two. And I know that has been an issue for 30 or 40 years, and it kind of has the same impact. It's a little bit different, obviously, but you have these structures that remain in public spaces for sometimes 2 or 3 decades. And it's just now that different groups within New York City are looking at those issues and finding ways to put pressure on the property owners to remove scaffolding. So as this kind of issue develops, finding different parallels like that and finding ways to make those parallels useful and using them to our advantage, I think is going to be really important, because it's a new issue. It's definitely a new issue. We see it a lot, but the city has a responsibility to keep their sidewalks clean. Access to public space is important. And this is the purpose. It's inhumane. They're doing it because they don't want, it's exactly what's been in the chat. They just don't want it in their backyard.
Yeah, and there's a significant environmental racism, environmental justice aspect to that often that these are done in areas that have been historically redlined, where people who have already been pushed, who are displaced and are experiencing homelessness, or who are living in vehicles, are pushed into redline communities. And then once they're there, then we're seeing these blocks installed in those redline communities, which is then further removing their parking, right? And so there's this really significant environmental justice aspect to this as well.
Jay.
Yeah, I just wanted to give a personal account for what was being talked about with these being like so inhumane and the malintent behind it. Just a few weeks ago, there's a group of teenagers who were living in like Yesler Terrace neighborhood. There's 4 of them. They all take care of each other. Most of them are working, but some of them have like health issues and whatnot. They were all swept. Now they're all in the wind. I found like 2 of them again, but still trying to find more of them. You know, these kids are like 16, 17, 18. I went by the spot where they were swept from. It's just a little corner park, but next to 2 developing buildings. No one goes there. And now it's just littered with like just a ton of rocks that are just so out of place. They're these massive rocks. And it's just like, damn, like, no one gets to use this space at all. You know, like there's these teenagers who are like all like, you know, most of them are in foster systems and got like messed up from it. And this is the best they can do. They got 4 of them. It's them against the world. City comes in, kicks them out. They're all still in the wind. And now there's these like giant rocks in this place. And it's like, what the fuck? Come on.
Yeah. No, it's heartbreaking. It's a horrible process that the city of Seattle believes is necessary. Hey, Joe and Melissa, did you have anything else you would like to add before I open this up to participant Q&A?
Yeah.
We're ready.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you guys. I'm still getting good with it, trying to figure out what to say to you guys, but thanks for listening. I will get better, and I hope to be more involved in this, because we're starting out where you guys want us to be at, because we're just recently renters. I mean, we're right there, right where you guys talking about. We're at the very beginning of that. So maybe our journey might be to go something new. It'd be kind of cool. Appreciate it.
Congratulations on your new apartment. I hope it is comfortable and excellent. Really, I know that is a huge accomplishment. And I wanted to open this up to our participants. Did anyone have any questions for our panelists this evening?
Oh, is it okay? Sorry, I need to raise my hand.
Please.
I had a question earlier because people were discussing, the MDARS program and how, the removal of RVs and vehicles don't receive the same notice and, outreach as like sweeps do, even though sweeps themselves half the time don't really have either of those things. So I was curious, subsequent to that, if it would be more beneficial or in fact more harmful to loop in like those things together, or in fact, I mean, would it even make a difference? Yeah.
Go for it.
It's a good question, and I'm not going to pretend like I can answer that question. I was going to say straight up because I don't know, and I'm not exactly sure. I think it probably depends on the situation of the person, but I generally the MDAR. I mean, again, they're not utilized all the way that they should, and they're not a perfect system anyway. The protections that they offered theoretically would be very helpful, but if we're talking about they're offering a space in an emergency shelter, and that may not be what that vehicle resident wants. And in that case, and if they are being offered a space in, say, DESC's downtown shelter, and they're living in an RV, that's their refusal of that is going to be seen as service resistance, which is a whole other can of worms, and it really gets to this issue that I would say it's not service resistance at all. It is a mismatch of the service with the person need, and that's where. So I'm not sure that actually it's good that it would be better if they had the legal protections of the MDARS, but the provisions of the MDARS may not actually meet the need of the person living in the vehicle, because they're generally actually about providing the person emergency shelter bed space, and that may not actually be what that vehicle resident wants.
Jay?
I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, I have never, not once, seen someone who's in an RV be like, "Oh yeah, let me give up my RV. You can tow it, and I'll go to a congregate shelter bed." It just doesn't. That doesn't happen. I similarly think, like, yeah, more protections, cool. I'm pretty skeptical of the MDAR as a document because I've seen it not get followed more times than I've seen it get followed. I think that there's a crew of vehicle residents that have like formed a little org called Sleepless in Seattle. They're really rad. They try to help tow each other. They do a lot of work. They're really great. You should follow them on Instagram, Sleepless in Seattle. And they're calling for basically, it's kind of like they want, yeah, thank you, Dee. They instead of like MDAR level protections, they just want like an end to the 72-hour parking enforcement, like as it relates to people in their homes, so it's like, which would effectively be like a pretty big step in ending sweeps for RV residents, so less of like, in order to sweep, you have to give these provisions, more of like, just don't do the sweep because we can survive just fine as long as you don't move us around every 72 hours because we're constantly getting those parking tickets, so I think if we're looking at those kind of like little reforms, I would move us more in that direction.
There's one thing, I'm sorry, I don't mean to talk a bunch here. There's one thing I want to add is that there is a movement among some outreach and service providers to create what is called a safe zone. Sometimes it's called safe streets. And so keep an eye out for that, because you may see that coming through. You may hear that talked about. That is essentially a sort of a movement to create areas where there would be a moratorium on these 72-hour restrictions, so that people, these would actually be areas where people have already been living in vehicles for quite some time, and they would be basically sort of infrastructure would be brought in, toilets, a septic pump out program that operates in Seattle, which is pretty awesome. A water would be brought in, and it would be a way for people for case managers to meet directly with their clients who are living in those spaces. So if you see that sort of language coming around, all of you who are listening to this about safe streets or safe zones, this is an example of some people who are actually trying to create exactly this sort of thing. So that we need more. If you are so interested, they can definitely use your advocacy and support for those sorts of programs.
Honestly, the only time I got offered shelter before I was permanently housed was the offer of a tent at a sanctioned encampment in exchange for my keys and title. And at that point, my vehicle still ran. Why would I do it? But yeah, no, it's wild that, they don't see it as an asset. And Katie, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, a lot of people I work with, I kind of ask, like, what is your ideal like situation? If money was no object and everything, you could have everything you want. And people are often like, yeah, I want a house. I could live there with my friends. Like I could fix it up. But then when I ask the next question, which is, okay, like of the city set asides, what are you interested in? Maybe people would say tiny home, maybe not. But then, usually when I'm trying to talk kind of creatively about, well, what would help you right now? And people are saying, yeah, I just want a place that I'm allowed to be, and no one tells me I have to move. And I'll live in my tent, and I will work with whoever I have to work with to get to the next step. It's just a total pain in the butt for me to have to move all the time, lose everything, and start over again. And I like the ACLU's definition of sweeps because it includes the words disbanding communities, because that's what I continue to see be the most harmful, one of the most harmful results of sweeps, is that people who have had the chance to build relationships and get to know one another then can't find each other again. And then, so how are you supposed to get ahead if you don't have your support network? And we know, like, people will quit their job and go like with their partner and move closer to family so they can raise a kid, because they need the family's help raising that kid. It's the same for unsheltered people. They need help with their life and doing basic things every day, because basic things are that much harder. You don't just get to go to the sink and grab a glass of water. You have to go get a glass of water. If you're sick, you really have to have someone else take care of you. And if you talk to people about their root causes of how they became unhoused, it's often related to health, physical or mental. And so if you have people who are suffering from health conditions, physical or mental, who are out there without these basic needs, their biggest support is going to be each other. And then so to take each other away from them is extremely awful. And so can they just have a place where they can build that support until they have a chance to move on to the next goal? And that's kind of the idea of a no sweep zone, is a place to build that community and build those support networks up. And maybe one community will look different than another community. And folks at one community might need this resource versus this resource, and it could be different.
Thank you, everyone. Did anyone else from our audience have any questions this evening? Go for it, Kelsey.
Sorry, I hate to be that person, but I'm often this person. We had also talked to, I think I mentioned earlier in the chat, we had talked to real change vendors yesterday, just about their experience and listening to them. And, we did hear, about this increased vigilantism and ultimately like private security hired by stores just being a lot more willing to harass people out of like a very public space. But outside of that, something that was also brought up was how often people who are stuck outside or are just generally in vulnerable situations get preyed on by deliberately bad actors. And we were hearing stories of people essentially getting forced to like move drugs or otherwise be like killed or targeted in one way or another. And I'm just curious how often that's heard, or if this is a little bit more anecdotal. And then in addition, like what even can be done in those situations? Is there like intervention services that, we do supply to like our house residents that we can also supply to our homeless residents, or what does that look like?
Who wants to take this one on?
I actually will take it on. Or
Tanya!
So is that uncommon? Depends on the community, that the unhoused community. It depends upon protection factors. It also depends on where the community is located. But speaking from my own personal experience as well, having been unhoused, if your option is a safe place to sleep, and that's the thing that you have to do, there really isn't a question about it. And intervention wise, not so much. There are those that work like Stop the Sweeps and other groups that make these connections and keep an eye out and try to filter through, but there isn't like a direct line to, hey, we know this is happening, how do we get you out of this situation? It's not always that easy, but the biggest thing is the creation, as Katie has said, Jay, Graham, everyone, of community. People that you trust, that watch out for you. There was, I don't know, it was probably, Dee, you might remember, a year ago now, maybe 6 months ago, where there was someone going through encampments and terrorizing women. Do you remember that? I think it was like a year ago, maybe. And it literally became, there were groups in the central district who were literally becoming safe havens for women to check in every day. And sometimes that's what needs to happen and create those communities. So Kelsey, there is no easy answer to that. Yes, it happens. but there is no like set way or easy way to get help in those situations. And in Seattle, or really in Washington, if that person falls into addiction while they're doing this, we know that addiction resources are minimal right now. Anyway, there isn't space or doctors. So it's kind of up for grabs, unfortunately.
Jay?
Yeah, with this, I actually want to like share a story from CHOP of all places back in 2020. Yeah, just to speak to the frequency, you know, it's hard to say. It definitely happens. I've talked to people who've really been through it in situations similar to what you're talking about. But there's this one guy during CHOP, and this kind of goes on to like creating community and also having like resources in place for community to connect others to, you know. Because what happened was there was this guy and he went into like full-blown mental health crisis and was like up on a roof and was like, you know, talking about like suicidal stuff, but also just kind of like talking like he had like clearly had some terrible shit just happen to him. And you know, CHOP was a wild time, but one thing you can say about it is everyone who was there was looking out for each other to the best that they could. So after like 3 hours of talking this dude down, me and this other person were with him for like 5 or 6 hours. And this dude just told me all of this stuff he's been through with exactly what you're talking about, of being like in a situation of such precarity that he had been kind of like trafficked and forced to sell and do all this stuff with like constant threats on his life. You know, sorry, this is like, it's like heavy stuff, but you know, it's a heavy question. And what we were able to make happen was we held him there for a little bit, you know, just like, we're like, hey, you stay here with us, you know. He stayed there with us for a few days. We got connected with people. People were in this like moment of really wanting to help people out. And then after just a few days, we got this dude connected with like a halfway house situation for people who are like surviving some of the stuff that he's gone through. And the dude went inside, and 6 months later, when I checked on him, he was still there, you know. So it really is just kind of one of those situations. And you know, shop obviously can't happen every single day to make that happen, but it was people coming through, people listening, providing a safe space, getting a person out of that bad situation, and then having the resources available to them to get them into a good situation. And that's going to look different based on the circumstances, but that's like one thing we were able to make happen because we had that like community built up who had connections to resources that could be supportive.
Community is so important when times are tough. We all have to be there for one another. It's so important. I see your hand, Graham.
Yeah, and you know, I hear a pattern here. I don't know if anyone else has noticed it, but it's safe space, right? It is, you know, so it is the habitation of public space, the limitations and the constraints on private space that force a person to have no option but live into public space. That where it's in those public spaces where we don't have garbage waste disposal, public services for people with suicidal ideation, people who are struggling with substance abuse. And I appreciate what you were saying, Kelsey, about not framing homelessness as a specifically drug related issue, because we're not talking about people in their condos and now their drug use either here, which we probably should be if we're talking about drugs. There's a hell of a lot more drugs used inside of a private housing than on the streets. But you know, I think that the theme is that it is the provision and the security of space that allows people to create community, to be able to connect with their communities, to connect with systems of care. Unfortunately I was not in Seattle during the CHOP protests, because I was down in San Francisco for the last 2 years and doing research with people living in vehicles. And one of the things that I can share with you that's sort of an example of how these things can work, there is a program that is starting up in the Silicon Valley right now that is a 6-acre RV park for people who are living on the streets. And it is a way for people to actually move in full communities of RVs from the streets into the mobile home park and maintain their connection as a community. And they're being connected with social services, housing navigation, if that's what they choose. And it's a way, you know, and medical care. I bring it up because there are solutions. There are things we can do. We need to radically think differently, and we need to be able to, I think, again, think about how do we reverse that flow of dispossession? How do we show that we can get more out of using unused wastelands, in a sense, by providing them as spaces for housing, as places where people can live safely? And I want to stress that these need to be safe spaces where people can live, not unused industrial wastelands. I don't want people living on that. We need safe places where people can be healthy, but that we need to be able to stretch our imagination, to move past the sort of rigidity that we understand about how space is occupied and how it's organized in our society. We have seen in COVID-19, all those rules went out the window. Okay, it is not so rigid. It is far more flexible than any of us probably could have imagined. And the way that we still see cafes taking over our street, our sidewalks, is a perfect example of that. And I think that we have an opportunity still in this moment to push back on those sorts of things and say, you know what, why aren't we finding these locations? Why aren't we taking federal military bases and turning them into mobile home parks for people? Why aren't we, working more to find areas that are not being utilized or are being, quote, underutilized, underproductive, and show that they can be more cultivated and more productive by providing a space for our unhoused neighbors to find stability?
Go ahead, Katie.
Yeah, I mean, we know the city can do things when they put their minds to it. A good example recently is they've been asking me, because the mayor's doing this new unified care team. And so they've been asking me like, oh, where should we put bathrooms? I was like, well, there's like all these different places you could put bathrooms in Ballard for my folks. And I'm like, how about right here? And they gave one porta potty. Now, the All-Star game, Taylor Swift happened, and there was like hella porta potties all around the Taylor Swift concert for all the Swifties. That happened super quickly. That was not something that was like, oh, we need to plan this for a year. That was like, oh, we're gonna make sure these fans have their needs met. But they can't do the same thing for our unhoused neighbors. Why? It's not that they can't do it, it's that they don't want to. And they don't think that unhoused people deserve that, which we all here believe is garbage, and that's a poor excuse. Yeah.
So true. Fadi?
Just to echo that, the one thing that I wish there more was, the one thing I see is there's no compassion in the process. There's no understanding. I think Katie said it right, that if the city wanted to do something, if they wanted to address this problem and set the standard for a lot of different cities across the United States, they could, but they're choosing not to because they're afraid that venturing into that direction is going to hurt their bottom line, hurt the next elections, whatever the case may be. But there's a lot to be said about the network of advocates, including sort of, I saw someone said something about street family, about everyone that's on this call, anybody that's helped with stopping the sweeps, creating the narrative. There have been cases that have come to us where the only thing that has allowed us to be successful in those cases are the people that are present at the sweeps, or the vehicle residents that help other vehicle residents, because creating that story, preserving that story, and then being able to tell that story is extremely important. And the stronger that story is and the stronger the network is, the more that we can do in terms of pointing out to the city that, hey, this policy isn't just bad policy, it's immoral, and it's going to hurt your bottom line too. Just give it time. So I just wanted to point that out, and I'm really thankful for everybody that I've met through the sweeps, and thankful for everyone that does their part, because truly there were some results that we only achieved based on the narratives that were brought to us. And that comes from you being present.
Jay, go ahead.
Yeah, just kind of wanted to like jump off from narratives and like, the importance of like talking about this, and also just kind of the, like what you said about, they're worried about their bottom line, they're worried about next election and stuff. I think that the election thing is so real. And when I said earlier, like sweeps start with NIMBYs, that's really, I really like think that that's where a lot of it comes from, you know, just people around who are pissed and don't recognize that when they complain about something, it sets this whole apparatus of violence into place. And so for folks who are here, who are wondering how you can plug in, but maybe you can't show up to a sweep, or maybe you can't, like, you know, go to a mutual aid group and do distro or whatever, like, I really implore you, like, go find those people who like hold those beliefs and try to engage with them and talk with them. Like, I know it's like, it sounds like you're beating your head up against a wall, and it feels like that 1000%. I've had so many conversations, but if you've got the privilege to be in a space where you can go and do that and engage with those folks, then you absolutely should, because we got to start like pushing back on these NIMBYs who don't, I don't think, sometimes they recognize what they're doing, but oftentimes they're just like pissed. And a little bit of engagement can go a long way. I've been at sweeps where like the person who is the one who's hit and find it, fix it like 50 times a day, I sit down and talk with them for like an hour, you know, because I can do that. And all of a sudden they're going and getting socks and underwear for people, you know, like it's exhausting work, but I really think that changing kind of the perspective is like a part of a long shift of pushing people into recognizing that they are calling for these huge systems of violence, and massively like blowing up other efforts like Katie was talking about, service providers who are trying to house people, just all like kind of blows everything up. And there's like this kernel where we got to start there. We got to get the NIMBYs. We've got to defang them. So that's my quick pitch.
Thank you. Hey, since we are starting to run low on time for the evening, I have one more thing to mention before I hand it back to Tanya. Graham, at one point, a handful of months ago, was like, we should count eco blocks. And I'm like, we should count eco blocks. Well, we're at the point where we want to count eco blocks. So if you are in Seattle and would like to assist us with mapping where the blocks have been installed, please reach out to me at dee@bseattle.org. I will be happy to plug you in. And with that, we do have a main action item, and I will let Tanya take it away. Thank you very much, everyone.
All right. I want to thank everyone for being part of this tonight. This was absolutely fantabulous. I also want to give a couple of updates before we jump into the action. We were just let to know that the Tenants Union General Assembly that we discussed, I apologize for my dog, he's very excited, has been canceled. We'll know more about this soon. And then also Jay let us know that the Solidarity Budget event is happening at Rainier Playfield. So just some updates there. So at every workshop, we like to include actions that individuals can take right this minute when you get off here, or to pass along to friends. And the Services Not Sweeps Coalition is launching a campaign to demand that the Seattle City Council pass legislation to ban encampment removals during the winter and during extreme weather events. For example, what we just had with all the smoke and the hot temperatures. In 2020, through organizing, Seattle won the winter evictions ban to protect tenants from being displaced during the 3 coldest months of the year. This ban would build on our existing winter eviction ban and expand those protections to folks who are already living outside and just trying to survive through Seattle's cold, wet, and dark winter months. It would also prevent the city from displacing people during the increasingly regular cold snaps, heat waves, and wildfire smoke our region has been experiencing. Encampment sweeps are traumatizing and dangerous for those who experience them, costly for taxpayers, and ineffective at actually getting people permanent housing. Seattle cannot claim to respect and uphold human rights as a core value while continuing to perpetuate these violent acts against the most vulnerable neighbors. We have the opportunity to push for a more compassionate approach to our city's response to homelessness, but we need your help. Please take a moment to take action regarding this campaign that will build on our city's existing winter eviction ban by extending protections against displacement to the most vulnerable members of our community who are already trying to navigate homelessness in the winter. Like the winter eviction ban, this would prevent sweeps from December 1st until March 1st, the time of year when survival is the most challenging for folks living outside. And we will drop in the chat the links to the email to sign on. And if you're interested in getting involved with the Services Not Sweeps Coalition, that website will be there as well. So once again, thank you all so much for coming and being a part. We will be sending out the recording of this in the next week or so, so that everyone can rewatch it or share it with friends. And I don't, Dee, raise your hand. Do you want to say something?
I did. Before we close out, Graham had something quick to pitch as well. So if you don't mind, go.
I just want to say, for anybody who's interested in learning more about vehicle residency or wants to help in this, I'm the director of the National Vehicle Residency Collective. We're very honored to be working with Stop the Sweeps and in supporting the severe weather moratorium on sweeps. And if you'd like to learn more, you can visit us at www.vehicleresidency.org. It's effectively my name, the email address I put in there. So please send me a message or sign up to attend our monthly meetings or our annual summit around vehicle residency across the United States.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming tonight. This has been an incredible roundtable discussion. Joe and Melissa, thank you. It was an honor to be in a community space with you both tonight, as well as our other experts, Katie, Graham, Jay, and Fadi. Thank you so much. And I hope you all have a great night.
Thank you so much, Dee. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you. Thank you. Wonderful panel. This was excellent. And all co-panelists, please reach out to me if you'd like to connect. I'd love to talk with you all more. Great work, everyone. You're doing